Good evening. I will speak in English. I hope everybody will understand me. I would like to thank the Goethe-Institut for having me here as a guest, and I would like also to thank the Open Arts Foundation and Vesselina and Karen SARIEV for having me here, and also for the very intense program. I had a chance to meet artists, see different sides, experience a little bit Sofia, and also a little bit Plovdiv. I will try to talk today about some ideas about collecting. I will show you a number of works as an example for the collection that I'm curating together with a partner, and maybe as a kind of introduction, it's maybe quite important to stress how we, Natalie and myself, we have an office in Berlin, how we understand curating, collecting. In some way we connect it to storytelling. It's something, all these objects that we have to deal with, they are somehow embedded in a field of history, in a field of the social reality, in the individual life of the artist, in some kind of psychological state of the artist. And this kind of network or grid that is somehow carried by nearly all objects that we know is something like an underlying narrative. The narrative is not easy readable. It's not a narrative that comes in words or as a written story. It's a narrative that has to be somehow translated, that has to be somehow transformed into language. And we always understood our method of curating in some way that we are not very much interested in following our ideas and to look for artworks that are illustrating then our ideas or our concepts. But we are more interested in finding out these narratives, in trying to tell the stories, and in trying to develop the storyline. For sure, if we come to contemporary art, it's rather a complicated novel. It's rather a novel with many different layers, with many different storylines that all maybe combine to some field of a contemporary narrative or a contemporary kind of novel. All these ideas are not based on, more or less, only on our own reflection about the role of curating. Very important for this is Mieke Baal. She's a writer, linguist, cultural analyst from the Netherlands. She was founding in 1991 the Amsterdam Research Institute for Cultural Analysts, and she wrote also some really interesting essays, telling objects, a narrative perspective on collecting. And some of these ideas, which are also forming our background, are also expressed in her essays and in her kind of cultural analysis and cultural studies. I will start with a film, and I will show you a very short film, just to define also a little bit like the framework and maybe also the wider perspective of the collection, and maybe also as an example how we can start to try to read the content, and by this way I hope also that during this kind of talk we can maybe develop some of the storylines that are of some importance in the collection. Now I have to try that I make this here somehow happen. Yeah. Looks like.
We hail a renewed Indies. We are for it.
I would like to conclude by saying that I'm available for immediate employment.
Apologies for freedom. I can't handle this.
Our boards are open, and we save them for everyone.
So this was just a short compilation of a work by Alexandra Pirici. She's an artist from Romania, and the piece was realized and shown for the Berlin Biennale last year. It's by 5 actors performed, and it's based on something like 80 scenes. These are 80 events that have been like the most visited internet events over the past years. So they got the most hits over the last past years, and they were shared by the biggest audiences. Alexandra Pirici made for each of these short events like a special little performing scene, sometimes with dancing, sometimes with sound, sometimes just with the movement of the body. The 5 performers were dressed in these kind of motion suits. The room is very dark as you see it, and it's more or less the imagination of the visitor how to somehow put the scene together with this event. It's also based on some kind of website, like online users can choose and make a choice for the scene that they really prefer, and then like a computer gives into the room the information which is also most favorite scene, and then these actors are performing the scene. There's also a kind of algorithm involved, and so that also like scenes that never been chosen by the users have a chance to be performed. The work was shown at the Berlin Biennale, and it's a work that was bought by the collection. So we decided that performance work and also like the vanishing moment of such of these kind of performance pieces is quite important for the contemporary artistic use, artistic language. And it was also for us as curators quite some discussion with the board we have to convince the people that also something immaterial, like a performance piece, could be something that should be part of a collection, that should be supported. We also supported the production for the Berlin Biennale, and which is quite a lot of cost because you have a number of actors that are doing it every day over the whole running time of the exhibition. And for sure also you have rehearsals up front, and you also need some additional people if somebody is getting sick, or so it's quite some effort. And we also have the obligation that we have to produce the piece at least in the coming 2 years again. Just a little bit as a starting point to have a kind of framework from one side. I will show you now another one, a second film, and then I go a little bit more back to some single pieces. Let me see if this can somehow function. No, this was not the right one.
Droga twórcza Włodzimierza Borowskiego odbija najważniejsze zjawiska, które wystąpiły w polskiej sztuce po 1945 roku. Zaczynał jako malarz, by później tworzyć obiekty, następnie zająć się performansem i sztuką konceptualną. Jego akcja o nazwie 8. pokaz synkretyczny odbyła się w 1968 roku w Poznaniu. Oglądamy teraz przestrzeń, w której miał miejsce pokaz o podtytule Uczulanie na kolor. W 3 pomieszczeniach Borowski rozmieścił różne ślady swojej działalności artystycznej: rzeźby, zdjęcia, asamblaże. Można je wszystkie odpowiednio pogrupować. Są więc niciowce, artony, włosice. Całość miała bardzo malarski, organiczny charakter. Niciowce były to szafy pomalowane na czarno i ozdobione falistymi, secesyjnymi rysunkami. Z niciowców wyrastały zwoje sznurów, plątanina nici. Można je podzielić na kilka grup, między innymi niciowce okienne, niciowce szafowe. Były też artony, swego rodzaju biologiczne formy wykonane z misek, różnych przezroczystych rurek, tworzyw sztucznych, włosów końskich, grzybów czy włókna kokosowego. Artony, wyposażone w ukryte we wnętrzu żarówki i neony, rytmicznie migotały. Jak napisał o nich krytyk, przypominały rafy koralowe albo fantastyczne pojazdy kosmitów. Popielniczka z niedopałkami. Są też różne narzędzia: wałki, pędzle, skrzynki, szmaty. Różne wiadra, szczotki, wszystko to, czym oni to później sprzątali. I zdjęcie Borowskiego, wiszące w rogu.
Where have they been?
will stop here. Let me see. Okay, the film is the first work that was bought for the collection in something like 5 years ago. It's a work by a young Polish artist, by Agnieszka Polska. She was born like in 1985, and the whole film was made only based on 5 existing photographs. From this whole kind of legendary performance, there are existing only like 5 black and white photographs, a short review in some magazine, and a little bit hearsay for the people. So it's somehow like, it's a fiction. It's a complete fiction about something like art history, about a very important art historic moment in the history of the Polish art development. And it's somehow like also the question, who is writing art history? Who is controlling the history? And who is somehow the author of the knowledge that we are having about history? And in some ways, it was for us very interesting that here an artist is taking over the control of the history and somehow rewriting it, even like building up the whole space just from the description. And then there's one of the photographs that is very well known, the photograph of himself with his eyes, because during the performance some people drilled into the eyes. That was also some part of the performance. This was the first work. At this point, like Agnieszka Polska was quite something new for us, but it was also something where we were like realizing, if we are concentrating the collection on Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, that there are many things we have to learn, that there is a lot of the history not yet written, and that something like the official history we know maybe about is not the history we can trust. And in some way, the information from artists is for us a quite important source to look also sometimes back. We are a contemporary art collection, but for sure we try also sometimes to go back and to find something like roots, like references that also somehow explain the time, like in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, some exemplary works that can maybe help also to build a bridge to something what is contemporary and something what was maybe done a little bit hidden, a little bit maybe not in the official kind of cultural policy of some of the countries. And that's also like the case with the next works that also only exists in these kind of 5 vintage photographs from 1989. It's a work by Dan Perzowski, who is maybe more well known to you by his little drawings and the little like somehow like cartoon-like even little comments on maybe political events, on social things. And Dan Perzowski is one of the artists that plays for us also a role like somebody who is bridging the time over the period when the Iron Curtain was falling down. He is somehow like this generation that also connects maybe something from the past and also something from what is really contemporary. He was born like 1961 in Sibiu, and he was a highly talented kind of gifted boy. So the Ceausescu regime took him like very early on, with the age of 9, into a special class to train him as a kind of really maybe a brilliant drawing person for some kind of super realistic portrait of the dictator or something like that. He did something differently. I'm very happy about that. And he was member of a group from the artist union that was more or less artists under 35. And these artists under 35, they had some opportunities to move to some different cities, and they moved to Oradea in the west of Romania, and the group there worked for a couple of years in these areas where maybe some freedom and liberty was possible, and that was nature, going out to the nature or the private whatever living room. And this is just one example of some of the actions that he did there. There was this room with this tree with a little space inside. He was climbing inside, and then it was covered with white paper, and then he jumped out of the white paper. And all these kind of activities with a group of 6-7 people, many of them are not documented at all, so it was really done for the group as a kind of experience also, maybe also as a testing ground for a different language, for a kind of different use of maybe what art can be, what art could be. And just from these actions there are these 5 photographs existing. And it was also like for us quite important to realize after a little while we have also to look with the collection into these kind of somehow lost documents and somehow this kind of lost history, and also to try to tell a story with these kind of lost moments and documents. These are just examples in the collection. Maybe I can tell you also something about the collection in general. It was started like 5 years ago. It's a collection from the Deutsche Telekom, a large internationally working company. And we decided we will focus on some area that was also new for me. Like I was trained very much in the Western usual kind of art market and galleries and this kind of field. And when I decided like 5 years ago, let's try to make a collection that has as an artificial framework Eastern Europe. I also thought in the beginning that's just one whole area quite similar, and then I realized no, it's very, very complicated, and all the countries have their different kind of histories, they have their different kind of stories. That's why I think also like in recent art history about Eastern Europe countries, people are starting to talk more about micro histories, of parallel histories, of parallel narratives. Just that the overline of the Western rule of how art history is written is not correct. It has to be corrected because there are many different lines that has to be somehow taken into account. I will give you just another example for maybe also some kind of other kind of issues and themes that are in the collection of some importance. This is an example of a work by Sanja Ivekovic, who was born in 1949 in Zagreb and played a quite important role already in the 70s, with many video works, with many kind of performance work. And you might know that Yugoslavia had a different role in the communist countries, trying to do their own way, quite independently. There have been many movements since the 1950s in Yugoslavia, and especially in Croatia, different kind of groups that came up, and it's maybe also interesting because I think there's a discussion about a pavilion for the Venice Biennale that Yugoslavia decided as one of the first countries from the former Eastern area, 1951, to take part in the Venice Biennale again. And it was quite important for the artist to have this chance and this opportunity to become part again of a kind of international dialogue and of an international confrontation. The series Women's House by Sanja Ivekovic was originally a series just posters for the public space. In about 1998, there was a discussion about a women's house in Zagreb. It was the first kind of women's house that was planned for this region, just where women could look for shelter and protection. And Sanja Ivekovic was very active in supporting and raising awareness and funds for this house. And over the time, she developed then this kind of series to use existing advertisement for luxury kind of sunglasses. And she printed over these posters the stories from women that has suffered violence. And then also on this series is always like the name of the institution she was supporting and she was working with for this kind of activities. It's an ongoing project. These kind of posters were just used like over a period of 2-3 years. And it was like for different women's houses in Genoa, in Bangkok, in Istanbul, all over the world somehow. It's for herself, she's always saying that's not an artwork. For herself, she's just saying that was really a political work, that was a work that was really showing her engagement with the situation of women in the different countries. And but we also think that artworks are also documents. They are documents of a time, they are document of an historical moment. They are also document maybe of a personal situation of the artist's life and some special situation. And I think besides that kind of aesthetical, formal art value, they are also important, really important documents with a very personal touch. In some way, like completely different from all the other documents that we know. So that was also an important point for us to talk with her and to convince her that we want to have these kind of posters. There are 10 posters, that we want to have them in the collection somehow. I will continue a little bit with this kind of more documentary part, and I already mentioned Yugoslavia and the situation in Yugoslavia. Like maybe just to explain a little bit, we have had a piece about the Polish art by Jonathan Borowski, like this video. It's maybe also important to mention that the Polish Communist Party was the first party that officially gave up the doctrine of social realism in 1954 and decided that for sure the artists had always to serve for the big goal of the communist utopia, but also they decided that this is not by the way of social realism, but rather by abstract art, by constructivist art, and by a complete different language. They also replaced all the professors in the universities, and they really made a complete cut. That was also the period of this after Stalin's death, when somehow there was some kind of new movement. As I mentioned, Zagreb had many also similar kind of groups, like Exat 55 was a very important group there, already starting like in the early 50s. There were like the new tendencies from 71 on, which were also very much related to technology, to computer technology, to also like many kind of new technical possibilities. And there was a group of 6, starting like in 1975, also with an artist like Mladen Stilinovic. I don't know, when you have a chance to visit the Venice Biennale, just in the main exhibition space you come in, and there is the welcome piece is a work by Mladen Stilinovic. It's somehow the artist at work. The artist is sleeping, somehow laying in his bed and having maybe ideas or something like this. And it's like also like a very important thing, also against this kind maybe of ideology what an artist has to do to serve the society or whatever. But maybe also an artist needs time to think and to consider and to conceptualize some of the works. This is here also like it's a documentary example of a work by Vlado Matek. He was one of the members of the group of 6. I would say it's more maybe a poet, a philosopher, somebody in the middle between how you can visualize language, how you can maybe visualize words, how you can find a form for a word. And one of his actions, like in the 70s, has been like to put little notes in the streets and just written with the thing, read poems by Mayakovsky. Mayakovsky, you might know, this quite well-known writer, very much engaged in the early time of the Russian Revolution, and then a little bit, I think, disillusionized, and he's made suicide in the 1930s. We came to this work by Vlado Matek just by another piece we had bought earlier by Igor Grubic. He's also an artist from Zagreb and born much later, like in 1969. In 2008, like 40 years after whatever the revolutionary years of 1968, he was thinking what he can do to somehow honor this kind of anniversary, and he decided to do every day some revolutionary action and to dedicate the whole year to some kind of activity in a way. From all these kind of activities, there were, in the end, there were like 33 liberation rituals, some are documented in photographies. And one of the action you see here, that was also like read Matek, in some kind of reference to the piece by Vlado Matek, like read Mayakovsky. And there he was going just through the public streets in Zagreb. He had some people helping him, playing also some kind of military kind of activity, military performance. And he announced to the audience like read Matek, read Matek. Another work, and that's maybe a different story, what I want to address here, is a work also by Igor Grubic, Angels with Dirty Faces. He went in 2008 to a mining area in Serbia, Croatia, the Kolubara mines, and he visited there the working people, the miners, and he made from these miners portraits, a little bit using like in the back this Wim Wenders motive, and Angel over Berlin. And for sure, like when I was telling you in the beginning, our work as curators is something like to find the stories, to find the narrative layers somehow in the work. So you have to do some research somehow. The work is not It shows a working person, it shows maybe the person as a kind of working hero, just in his normal dress, as a kind of angel, but what is the story behind? So somehow for sure you have to do some research and you have to understand what's going on. And these miners were very important, like in the strike 2000 against Slobodan Milosevic, the kind of last communist president of Serbia and Croatia. And there was a kind of public upheaval against him. He was already accused by the Hague Tribunal because of war criminal activities. And people were protesting against him. And he was asking the workers in Kolubara to come to support him. So he was hoping that the workers would come and help him against the kind of public. And the workers decided, no, we close the mines, we don't produce anymore, and nearly like 2/3 of the energy production of Serbia was dependent from these kind of miners. So he had to resign. And in some kind of, to honor these real kind of, let's say, working heroes, a couple of years later, like Igor Grubic decided to visit them, to talk with them. He also made a film with them. He did some individual portraits, and he worked really on the side. And some of these projects, some of these portraits are an example of it. If we come to the history of these kind of changes in Eastern Europe, then for sure we also come to some more or less like tragic events, like especially if we move to the history of the many wars that have taken place in the area of the former countries of Yugoslavia. And this is a work like 1976 by Sheila Kamaric. It's a portrait of herself, and she was born in Sarajevo, and she put over this portrait this kind of notice, a mustard smell like chic Bosnian girl. And maybe you don't understand in the beginning why she's somehow doing this, and there's a little note on the poster that you can find. And there you see that it's done by an unknown Dutch soldier. It was documented by some photographer in this military army barracks in Potokari in Srebrenica. And if you go on further on, you maybe also remember that there was this kind of massacre in Srebrenica, where nearly like 8,000, mostly men, mostly Muslim men, from 13 to 70 years old, were killed by this kind of strange army somehow. And that United Nations soldiers didn't react. They had no kind of command to do something. They stayed in their army barracks. And in some way, Sheila Kamaric has experienced during the time of the many civil wars in Yugoslavia. Also, she was in Sarajevo during the siege of Sarajevo. She experienced many of these kind of traumatic experience, and quite a lot of her work are dealing with such kind of very personal experience, but I think always she's able to transform it in something that tells much more, and that not also talks about some kind of personal kind of tragedy. In some way also this kind of self-portrait by her that we used as a cover for the catalogue for this exhibition that you mentioned before, The Fragile Sense of Hope. It's 30 years after. It's also like her 30th birthday. And It's maybe also like 30 years after or whatever. Is it like it's also herself? It's a different kind of self-portrait in some way, and maybe it's also an image. It shows maybe some kind of Western consume, whatever, dreams, like having nice hairs, nice diamonds, whatever, but also at the same time maybe you are becoming blind and you don't see anything anymore. I want to come to some complete different storyline in the collection, and that's some of the influence that maybe, let's say, like Western art has taken or is taken. Like in many cases, like talking with many artists, for sure now today it's not a big problem, but during most time of their youth or maybe their school, there was not so much of access to real information, to real works, to see real works. And some of these works have maybe also like a legendary kind of, even mythological kind of state. And I show here a piece by a Polish artist like Aneta Grecikowska, and it's called Untitled Film Still, number 27. It's from 2006, it's in color. And it's based, for sure, on the very, very well-known series by Cindy Sherman, the Untitled Film Stills from 1979. So it's really like something like, where we are here. So it's like nearly like 25 years in between. And it's a large series of Cindy Sherman. Cindy Sherman did like 69 of these photographs that are playing more or less this cliché of film noir, of actresses, of well-known scenes, but it's all invented and it's always herself, always she's getting dressed up, she's doing the different kind of maquillage and everything. And somehow, like some years later, like Aneta Grecikowska is just repeating this kind of playing with different roles and doing also all these kind of 70 different kind of personification of oneself. This is also like an example of her work, and there you see the Cindy Sherman piece. It's quite funny if you look sometimes into the details, what is really changed and what really somehow has been done. There are some more examples where artists are working with a kind of Western history, but for sure they are also working with the past, with the role of and the influence sometimes of this Soviet Union, and this is a piece by Nino Krivishvili. She was born like 1984 in Tiflis in Georgia. Her mother, her grandma, was after the Second World War, her mother was sent out of political reason to Gori in Georgia to work there in the textile industries. And she was in a company working that were producing wool somehow. And it must be that she always complained about that she is not living where she was actually coming from. The textile industry doesn't exist anymore in Georgia. Also, Georgia had a very large kind of silk industries with very in the Soviet Union really very searched for silk fabrics. Nino Krivashvili is working with all these kind of fabrics and all these kind of lost moments, and she is traveling more or less in this area through flea markets, and she looks for the fabrics that are maybe still available, and also for the wool that was produced in this kind of factory. And she found some kind of last little rolls of this wool, and then she bought the wool at this kind of flea market, and then she made a hand-woven piece with it, somehow also like in honor maybe to her grandma, and this is just the bill she received for it. So it's woven into this kind of piece in a way. This kind of sometimes this relation to the past, to the Soviet Union, is something that appears in quite many works that we are looking for in the collection, and we are also sometimes very surprised. There's some other point I've already spoken with Aneta Gretschikowska about the role of or the option to see original artworks. And like in a classical kind of academy, for sure, also all over the world, one important element has been also always to copy the big masters. But normally, if you're doing studies in Paris, you go to the museum and you really look at the real masters. And you try to imitate or learn something, or if you study in whatever place. But for an artist like in Romania, it was a little bit difficult to find the real old masters in a way, because they could not travel. And so they used books, more or less, to copy from the books the big masters. And this is, for example, Itzen books, this book that was published in 1981 about Piero della Francesca in Romania, and it was used at the academy to show to the students how they should maybe repeat, copy such artists they would maybe never see in their own life. And Ciprian Mureșan, an artist who was born 1977 in Romania, he just took this book from the school and then he redraw the whole 88 pages of the book. So not saying, I don't know, I do not copy now the master, I copy the book, what I really have. And he really redraw page by page by page of this book. So it's a very beautiful book in the same kind of size. It's 88 pages, and it's even the writing is copied with pencil, and also the texts are copied with pencil. And it's a marvelous piece. I think it's very beautiful, even if it's difficult to show to the public because it's quite fragile in a way. But it shows also that artists are reflection the situation they have been in, the situation at the academy, what they were learning, what they were what the people try to teach them, and also to use this kind of experience, of a quite unique experience to be in an academy, and then maybe to break it with some conceptual reflection and make a work out of it. The changing of the society from a whatever controlled socialist, communist society to a Western capitalist society is also, I think, all these changes, all the influences, is also a quite important storyline that appears in many of the works. And this is an example by Nikita Kadan, who was born in 1982 in Kiev. And I think you cannot see it, it's a horrible photography. Sorry for that, but it's a cityscape. He went just out into the city and then he drew with a pencil the buildings from Kiev and the street view in Kiev, and then he added by collaging with his papers the advertisement. That all the advertisements that have come as an additional layer over the city. And it's also how somehow this kind of city view, the cityscape, has completely changed with the appearance of Western companies and Western style of advertisement. And also because there's no control. In Kiev you can more or less, you pay a little bit of money to the city and you can do your advertisement wherever you want. Nobody cares about it. And so it's also this kind of uncontrolled capitalism, how it takes over. Even a very beautiful city was in many parts Kiev can be. for sure we try also sometimes to follow up situation like the Maidan in Kiev. I've been there sometimes on Maidan, and we are also trying to become in contact with the artists that are involved, with the artists that try to work there. And one of the artists, we were then also like asking for some wall painting for a wall piece, is Volodymyr Kuznetsov, who was born like in 1976 in Kiev. And for sure there was a discussion in this group. He's very active, still very active, and all these kind of committees around the committee about the changing of the society. He was also taking part in some committees that was advising or trying to advise the cultural ministry after the changes of Maidan. Not very successful, not much has changed in the country. But at this point they were still quite optimistic. And for sure they had always also the discussion about violence and non-violence. How far you can go if you're engaged in such a kind of political fight. And for sure in this way, like how to deal with the pigs, it's somehow like the oligarchs that are eating up the country in some way, and it's a question what you do, and there's this little hammer and sickle on the one side of the work where they are cutting the pigtail somehow. This little kind of point that there are many discussions have been also in these groups about if you should start to somehow use violence or not, or if you can stay peaceful in such situations. The question what to do in a situation like Maidan was also like quite important for Lesya Khomenko, also an artist from Kiev, born in 1980. And she decided somehow that being there as an artist brings you maybe also to the end of the artistic language, of the artistic possibilities. Like art is not really what can change the world in a very short moment, what can act with the political driving forces that do maybe decisions from day by day by day. And to solve this kind of problem, being an artist in the middle of this camp on the Maidan, she decided, okay, what can I do? The basic skills is drawing. The basic skill is just using a pencil and a piece of paper. And then she just decided she will take this kind of drawing board, take some paper, a carbon paper too, and making like from the people she were asking that were active, say, can I make your portrait? And she drew them very fast, and then she gave the original away as a gift, and she kept the copy from the kind of carbon paper. It's a large number of portraits. There are nearly like more than 200 something, and some of the carbon papers she used many times. So they are layered with the many peoples that she drew, and I think it's a very interesting piece because it really addresses very difficult questions, especially in the time of political changes, and what art can do and what the role of art can be in some way. I will come now to some different issues. Like there are nearly like 200 works are in the collection. They come from something like 65 artists. I think there are 17 countries represented. Some of the works are quite large. Some of the works are containing like 100 drawings or whatever, or 33 photographic plates. Some are large installations in a way, and we also have to see and try to find ways how we can integrate parts of the work into the daily environment of such a company like the Deutsche Telekom. When we started and we were asked to make a proposal to the company, what they could do in contemporary art, we had like two preliminary ideas. The one was art is not for decoration of the offices, and the other one was art is not for representation of some CEO offices. It's rather a value in itself, it's a story in itself, and we have to find some ways how we can maybe also with some possibilities that such a kind of telecommunication company has, how we can develop a structure and maybe also technological means to communicate the content, to tell the stories somehow, and somehow to do this translation from an artwork to maybe like the language, the communication in such way. And one of the example was also like we will have to create maybe some zones in the company, in this kind of daily working environment, more or less dedicated completely to art, with some kind of clear understanding that somebody who is coming there, that this person knows that this is still the company, but this is now really an area where we can see an artwork. So there's also some information, where there is some text, where there is also maybe some link to the website, or also maybe some link to an app. I can tell you a little bit more about that a little bit later. And one of the examples is also like a passage, a kind of public passage, semi-public passage in Berlin, in some place that Telekom calls itself Hubraum. It's actually a kind of place where they take on young starting up companies, gives them some advice, gives them some help, gives them a lot of like also administrative information and professional kind of supervising to develop maybe that kind of product, that kind of idea to some kind of marketability, for sure in the hope that these young guys find something very extraordinary and that they can have immediately can be immediately taken on by the Telekom. And one of these kind of vitrines is done by Eva Kotatkova. There are 4 actually of these vitrines. All have the theme of psychological theater, and they have all like they're very narrative. It's really fun to look at the little details and to look at these body fragments and the collages and some kind of strange little installation that she's doing there, and all have these kind of things that they have a different way of communicating, like at least from the titles, like this is a boy who talks through images. There are the other works like somebody who communicates through signs and simple drawings. There's a girl with multiple identities, and there is another girl who constructs her own worlds. So it's a very kind of good example also maybe for what artists are maybe doing and what they are trying to achieve in a way. And in general, we try to follow up an artist. It's a little bit difficult decision because it's for sure it's a selection, but we are rather thinking that we try to have maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces by an artist in the collection. And also to look at maybe something like from this year and then maybe something in 2 years and 4 years, and rather to have also a storyline in the individual works that the collection owns. This is just another example from also Eva Kotatkova, more like a sculptural piece. There's also like a sound installation is part of it. It's more or less like a good bubble of voices and sound, and what you maybe experience in some kind of group therapy Eva Kotatkova is also maybe an interesting artist because she, after her art studies, she also studied psychology, and she's very much playing with this kind of limitation, education, also the boundaries that you maybe experience during childhood, during growing up in family life, and it's a very important issue for her. And also the fragmentation of the body plays also always like a very important part. Just to show you, and that's maybe the last example of these real artworks I have here, and then yeah, she's Alexandra Durmanovic. She's 1981 in Novi Sad geboren, in Serbia, and her work is very much connected to sometimes genetic engineering, sometimes to artificial limbs, to medical kind of advantages, to replacement of the body. Also these kind of materials here, this plastic block is like orthopedic material that could be also put for a replacement of a bone or something like that. And the whole sculpture itself is also like let's say like how you say, like an, maybe you understand. You can take it out and then you can put this also like in the back of the box. So the sculpture itself is also its own container somewhere in some way. And if I have spoken about the Hubraum and the integration of the artworks, this is the Hubraum. It's this place in Berlin where there are a lot of these young people, whatever, creative people. And as one of the artists to integrate somehow the contemporary art language into the living environment, we had the honor to invite Netko Solakov to work there on nearly like 2 levels of the building, and all over these kind of, there's a bar, there are meeting places, there are discussion rooms and whatever, all over the place. If you really look in detail and follow up, you will find like his little doodles, goes with comments on the general kind of maybe working environment, on maybe situations about the technology, about communication, about what the company is maybe usually doing. It's very nice. It's a kind of second layer that you suddenly find in this kind of working environment. Like I think I have this photograph of the detail of this kind of, yeah, from the back, and it's also like in a way it's a kind of critical statement, maybe also like a little bit skeptical statement about what is happening there. So the people really like it because it also makes it gives some distance from this kind of working reality. As I told you, we were trying like very early on to find ways of communicating the content and the stories in the collection. One important tool is the website. The website is normally always updated and has a complete kind of overview of the works that are in the collection. For sure we would like to expand the website into more kind of linking it with more information and more also art historical connections. It's a lot of work. And there is an app, Telekom Art app, which gives like sometimes information about the artwork, sometimes also information about the activities of the artists, if some exhibitions are somewhere. And it's also like for some of the pieces that are in the offices of the Telekom, there are not many, but some, they have a kind of automatic system with a Bluetooth connection so that people that are passing by the artworks, they get some kling-a-ling-a-ling, and then they get some information about the piece. We also use this kind of app for a kind of guide for one of the exhibitions we were realizing, and it's something that is in the development. It's very difficult, and we don't know really precisely how we can use this media. It's learning also for us. It's a learning procedure in a way, but we think if there is a telecommunication company, then we should also try to use also all the facilities that they can offer. We started to show the collection in 2014, first in Berlin. Here you see an installation photograph of the Me Collectors Room. Like on the right, you have this red wall with some pieces of Igor Grubitsch, like the 366 Liberation Ritual, some of the series of the Angels, and there's another work like this, different tables by Eva Kotatkova. This is another different view of the space in Berlin. It's a work by Vergessen. It's a work by Polish artist Stanisław Drocz, who died. It's an older piece. It's also related to concrete poetry, and it's a wall piece that can always be, has to be always produced. And in also like maybe what I was showing in the beginning was a lot of black and white and documentary in a way, but there are always also like there are paintings, there are also classical paintings, or there's this kind of installation with living plants. It's quite beautiful. The pots are made from ceramic with a neon line from an artist from Romania, and the painter is from Albania. It's Genti Corini from Albania. In 2016 we realized an exhibition at the National Museum of Contemporary Art in Bucharest, in two big halls and on two levels. And just in the center you see a piece what is was also like quite important, different storyline by Tobias Putri from Slovenia. It's a modular piece. It consists of nearly 1,000 of these elements that you can stick together. And also like visitors are somehow, they can change it. They can just build up different structures. They can build up different kind of furniture elements with them. So it's a kind of work that can be always like adapted and changed. And it's also like a question, who is the author of a piece and what is happening with the piece. There you see a different kind of installation by Eva Kotatkova from this psychological theater, just to give you a short impression. Just also when I told you there are pieces in the collection that have sometimes a very large number. This is another series by Anita Gretschikowska, and just the title, yes, yeah, okay. And just maybe one important piece here is Roman Ondak that you see here, Futuropolis. It's made up of 100 drawings, and none of the drawing was done by him. He was asking like friends and acquaintances to make a drawing that gives maybe up the own vision of how the city of the future could look alike. And then there are 100 different kind of visions of the future city, and Roman Ondak's role was to find the proper frames for it. So it's also like the question, what is the role of an artist somehow? And what is the role of an author? Or is the artist maybe just somebody who is giving ideas into the society, into the community in some way? Just some other, and maybe that's a little bit for the future. It's still quite some interesting story behind these sculptures. They're made from soap. It's also by a Ukrainian artist, Maria Kulikovskaya. This exhibition was taking place at the Krolikania Palace in Warsaw. That's a dependance of also the National Museum in Warsaw, mostly based for sculpture. And we showed there as a kind of preview for an exhibition project that takes place this year in September, October. We showed there just for 4 days during the Warsaw Gallery weekend these 3 works by these Ukrainian artists. The soap sculptures has been originally installed in Donetsk, in Donbass, at some former factory for isolation material. It's one of the only important institutions, independent institutions in Ukraine, Izolatia Foundation, which were having there some studio places, some artist in residence possibilities. They had also like an ongoing program, somehow reviving these former industrial areas. And these figures were placed there by the artist, made in soap outside, and they were considered to vanish over the time with the rain and whatever, that just maybe the skeleton that holds the soap somehow would stay. In 2014, the area was seized by the self-proclaimed Army of the People's Republic of Donetsk. Most of the art was destroyed, and these figures were used for target practicing of this self-proclaimed army. So they are destroyed and gone. We knew about the story somehow before. We were in contact with Maria, and then we said, okay, we will help you to produce them again. And so she did them. She was still very angry about the whole procedure, so the green one in the middle she hit with the hammer in the end and put some kind of tomato soup on top of it. Just another example of the piece, like this is Elva Kotatkova, and just for the future, I hope this will take place like it looks now. This is the villa, the Palladian-style villa in Warsaw, the Krolikania Palace, and we have agreed on the title. It will be a title by Pravdolyub Ivanov. Yeah, it will be the title Pol Pravda, Half Truth. And also, like the people from the museum have agreed now that we will put it just on some linen, a little bit like handwritten and like a squatted house somehow. And this exhibition will open on 10th of September. That was a short little insight in this kind of collection. If there are questions, I'm here.
You've given us examples of a couple of storylines in your collection. Are those storylines preset now, and you're trying to sort of kind of work around and fill them in, or you're open to develop different sort of facets and storylines going forward in sort of enriching and developing the collection?
No. So we don't know what will be the storylines of tomorrow or in 2 weeks or something. But for sure, like it's somehow like when we are realizing that we find maybe a number of different artists in different areas working in some whatever, like with the heritage of the Soviet Union, whatever, and we see somehow that could fit quite well to the 3-4 pieces we have already with this kind of stories, and for sure we are quite intrigued to propose these works to our acquisition committee and to our acquisition board. So in some way, yes, but not necessarily that we are looking or searching for it. I think we are more open to what happens.
How do you happen to meet the artists? I mean, of course, there's the Maidan, and there are some activities, and for sure, always artists are close by. But for example, here is no Maidan, but you happen to meet Pravdolyub or Netko Solakov. I think it's a great feeling to be a scout. But could you describe your...
No, for sure, like the important information are curators that are working in the countries, sometimes galleries, but in many countries there doesn't exist a really working gallery scene. Institutions also sometimes. I think a very important source is in the beginning also like internet research. There are quite many internet pages done by artists themselves to promote some of their activities, or sometimes popping up galleries or exhibitions. And I think when you have somehow like made contact with 2, 3, 4 people, then it's like a snowball system. Then it goes like quite easy that you get some recommendation here and some recommendation there. And in general, it's I think the scene is very open to show what they are doing somehow.
How did Deutsche Telekom decide to create an art collection and not, for example, an urban farm or something else?
No, I didn't understand, sorry.
How did Deutsche Telekom decide to create an art collection rather than something else?
I don't know precisely why. So Deutsche Telekom is somehow the result of the Postministerium that was founded in 1870. And out of this kind of Postministerium, it has grown up to this kind of stock market company. It was over a long period of time, because of the importance of telecommunication, it was owned by the state. But since a couple of years, part of the state has been reduced drastically. For sure, during all this time of existence, the company had artwork in the offices somewhere around. And when we were asked what they should do now, somehow we were also looking at what they are having, and we were trying to make a kind of archive of what there is over the 100 years. And we realized that it's complete mishmash. Like no concept, no nothing. Just very arbitrary kind of pieces from there. And but they wanted to do something. They thought it's part of their responsibility as to the public. It's part of their kind of maybe policy in the company, that they have some obligation also to support like the cultural life, the contemporary life somehow. And that's why our proposal to make a kind of structured collection, to work actively with the collection, to try to use the collection as a mean of communication, as something that could bring also people together. That was maybe then the point that they were saying, okay, we have this tradition that we were always involved somehow in art, but let's do it maybe a little bit with some mind in the back or something like that. But they do also sports and music and
Since you are following all those scenes, do you see any common tendencies where this region, let's say, is going, the new artists, and what are the topics? Is there anything like this?
No, I don't think so. But I also think that in general, like maybe there are sometimes there are maybe like some kind of fashions, like short-lived fashions that maybe some kind of look or appearance or some materials or something becomes fashionable, and then suddenly you see it all over the world at some artistic points. But I have the feeling that more and more the time when we were able to think in styles or periods or something like that, I think that's completely over, and there are many individual voices and individual positions, and for sure, somehow we are living in the same shared reality in some way, and through the internet and the globalization and the general communication, it's also like leveled or whatever, and the reality in the cities is also the same. Like if you don't know precisely where you are, you could be at any shopping mall in the world. It's the same companies all over. But for sure there are still differences. I think there are differences in the mentality, in the light that some region has, in the smells, in the food, in the language, and maybe also in the terms that we organize our thinking process. But this even speaks more on this, in the direction of this argument that it's getting more and more individualized, I don't know, sometimes there are some tendency to work with digital media, whatever, like a new tool coming up, and maybe a complete new reality, or maybe also like a complete new field that art is only happening in the internet. That we give up the idea of the real object. But I wouldn't say that it's maybe that many people follow it, maybe people are developing something like it, but I don't think that it will become like now the tendency in some way.
I would like to ask also about the effects of your exhibitions. Are you reporting visitors, counting visitors to your sponsor? And what impressed me very much is how did you manage to enter the corporate world with arts, and what are the reflections of the employees of Deutsche Telekom on this art exhibition?
We are interested in numbers of visitors, but we are actually not so much visited only in the numbers. Like what is very important for us is always a kind of, when we do exhibition, is like educational programs, like more or less guided tours, maybe conversations, an accompanying program to invite artists, maybe for some discussion round in the exhibition spaces, and also like that somehow like the childrens are involved, that maybe schools are getting involved, and that there's from very early on some kind of access for the audience. And we are more interested, instead of whatever 4,000 people have visited the exhibition, to say like 20 school classes have come. I think it's for us a much bigger success in some way. The reaction of such a collection in a company, I think that's quite normal as maybe in the usual public and audience. You have people that enjoy contemporary art, that have fun, that can something do with it, and so you have people who don't care. And for sure we try to explain what we are doing to the people in the company, and we also try to make it accessible to them. But I wouldn't say that it's a different kind of percentage than the normal kind of audience might have in their approach to art. And I forgot now the other questions. No?
That was all.
Yeah? Okay.
What is the feeling you trust, your own feeling towards the work, or the knowledge of the context, or the narration of the artist himself or herself? What is leading for you in the selection of a particular work, not necessarily relating it with a narration of the whole collection?
I would say, to be honest, it's a stomach feeling. It's nothing rational. It's nothing thought out. It's nothing but no. I think it's a little bit, maybe that's maybe too much, but it's a little bit like falling in love or being attracted or something like that. And then for sure you try to, or I try then to reflect on this kind of first attraction and first impression. And that means maybe, okay, getting the story of the work. If you have fallen in love, it only puts on top of it. So then even if the story is fine, oh yes, it was the right feeling somehow. And if some other person is saying also something interesting about the works, then it maybe also adds to the feeling. And sometimes even if somebody is saying, I don't like it, somehow it gives you some reason for it, it can also be balancing your kind of arguments, and suddenly why you think, oh no, it's really, I think it's an important work. And
what is the sort of the long, is there a long-term objective of what you're trying to achieve in terms of sort of volume, or will it at some point will you say, okay, we're actually quite happy with this? Or is there a situation where you'd be looking, yes, we would like to refresh the part of it, we would like to put something in the museum? And what is it's been going for about 5 years now, so what is the end game of this? Where would you like it to drive it, and what you want to achieve at the end?
To add, for sure, like also different positions from different parts in the world. I think it would be like a step that would make sense when this kind of box has some kind of inner coherence and some kind of inner conceptual strength. Then maybe also to say, or why not to add something from, let's say, India, or I don't know, which really relates very well, either as a contrast or maybe as a kind of showing, oh look, there's a kind of similar language, there's a kind of similar mood in it. But this is not, it's just making more and more of this kind of works that we have to handle, and the storage is getting bigger and bigger. We don't know. For sure we could imagine that the company is rich enough to afford also an own little kind of museum or something like that. But we also think that we have to find a way how we can somehow bring the works back to the country somehow where they belong to, or to the region where they belong to. Because I think for sure it's a danger of a kind of neo-colonialistic approach. There's a quite wealthy company in Germany buying works from countries that cannot afford the works. And for the audience here, it's missing. Here the people don't have a chance to see the works that the artists that are living here actually produce. And they don't have a chance to discuss it, to experience the work, to find out their own kind of opinion, if they like it or not, or if it's important or not, and to just create a kind of evaluation of the work. And it's also important for the works that they have a life after. That they have a life after, whatever, in 10 years, in 50 years. And this can only be developed, I think, by public opinion, because people like it. And then it can stay and stay and stay. So there would be also some ideas if we can in some way, like whatever, collaborate with institutions, with museums from the countries, and whatever, giving the works as a long-term loan or something like that. But for sure it's also like a question how these institutions and museums are equipped, because for sure we have a little bit demand of conservational reasons and light and temperature and something like that. Could be also one scenario.
What you have with the discussion with the artworks that were taken from Greece into the British Museum. Just on that note, it's just a personal opinion. I think a lot of artists from Eastern Europe would be quite happy for a long time that organizations like yours take their work and show it to the West, because, I don't know, maybe you'll get that impression too, but a lot that's been created around this part of the world is to show to people like yourselves in the West, yes, that there is some identity here, there is some creative power, there's something interesting to be shown.
We try to establish now some collaboration with an institution in Germany, and to have with the institution in Germany also some kind of collaboration, maybe that we can invite artists from Eastern Europe to do a project in the German institution, and maybe do some funding. And for sure we were in the first step. We were now looking to show like the works, part of the collection in institution in Eastern Europe. But the next step is also like to look for Western European institutions and yeah, to create a wider dialogue.
Will we have a chance to see some of the artworks here in Bulgaria?
We try to work on some ideas about it, and maybe also on some realization about it.
This was quite an important question in connection with that of neo-colonialistic or neo-patriarchalic way of collecting art just for the space of your company or for the space of the CEO of the company, and you asking if there could be an exhibition here. I mean, there are various possibilities now. As you sure know, next year there will be the presidency of European Commission or Union here, Bulgaria, and there is this Plovdiv 2019 European Capital of Culture issue. But I would like to ask, do you believe in this construction between politics, European Union's support and the art? Because it's existing already 30 years now.
I think politics is maybe something that you can use in some way for realizing something, and some of these kind of opportunities like European cultural capital, or some of the construction like the presidency and of the whatever European committee or whatever. For sure there are opportunities where also some of the politicians sometimes find some little funds somewhere but no, it's for sure, and it would be silly not to use such opportunities. Yeah.
So I would say as well. Yeah.